That's right. Every little thing is going to be all right. We love this song in my family. It feels about as realistic to our lives as Yellow Submarine. But we love it. We are not an every little thing is going to be all right kind of a family. We are more of a something's not okay and we need to fix it right now kind of a family. There's a story that we tell about when I was an infant and I was having trouble sleeping through the night. Most babies start to sleep through the night when they're about 6 months old, by the time they're about 6 months old. But I was going on a year old, and my parents still weren't able to get their full night's sleep. They were still hearing me waking up crying and having to come in and comfort me. And they were worried about me, and they were certainly worried about their own sleep health. So my mom went to multiple sleep experts and finally sat down with one who said that part of the process would just involve letting me cry. And how long did she think she could lay in bed and just listen to me cry? She was confounded by the very idea of laying in bed and just listening to her infant cry. She's just thinking to herself, you're not supposed to do that. That makes you a bad parent. And I know that this is kind of what was coming up for her because decades later, when she tells this story, I can see on her face that she's intellectually processed this information, but still feels on a very fundamental level uncomfortable with leaving her infant in the crib to just cry. Eventually, she was able to take this advice to heart and began waiting longer and longer amounts of time before getting up and comforting me in my crib until soon I was able to sleep through the night. Shortly after, my parents began leaving a copy of The New Yorker in my crib, and I would just read that by the nightlight if I woke up. So that worked out. There's a phrase for doing something to avoid guilt, even when it's not helpful to your overall goal. It's called overfunctioning. Even though it was the right thing for me and the needs of our family all those years ago, it was really hard for my parents to listen to me crying and not get up to hold me. They felt guilty. They responded by overfunctioning. It often turns out to be the case that when we are part of a system of relationships, whether that is a family, a congregation, perhaps even a country, that responding to events within that system in a way that makes us guiltily feel like we are not doing enough is actually the right thing to do. This is a delicate balance. We can see that trying not to overfunction, it's complex, right? But I can speak to you from the perspective of one who consistently overfunctions, who has a hard time not doing what the guilt tells me to do. When I first learned about the damage overfunctioning can do in a system, I made a pledge to work on not overfunctioning. I picked a couple of specific areas that I was going to focus on. I paid very close attention. I worked hard and diligently to not overfunction. I strategized, anticipated, planned, fretted, engaged in some really hard conversations in order to not overfunction. And when I checked in about this process with a colleague a few months into it, they said, it sounds like you're overfunctioning at underfunctioning. All of which is to say, take my advice on this matter with a sizable grain of salt. We can see the negative effects of overfunctioning again and again, though. It comes up. One of my favorite TV characters of all time is Lisa Simpson, the plucky middle child from The Simpsons. She's a model student and citizen, always doing what needs to be done and helping out while her Older brother acts out, and her mother frets about her father's semi-functional alcoholism. She's so responsible that in one episode, her parents leave her in charge of her siblings despite her not being the oldest. But her brother Bart bristles at her having this authority, and typically he acts out. He makes a prank phone call to 911. He hits his head and he gets a lump on it, and then he locks himself in his room and bangs his head on his wall, quote, to make the lump bigger. I don't think anything on TV growing up burned itself as clearly into my consciousness as that image of a distraught Lisa trying to care for her brother despite his shenanigans. I empathized so deeply with the family member, student, citizen that she was, being undermined in her efforts to do the right thing. That seemed like the worst thing in the world to me. But it's precisely that single-minded drive to do the right thing, to be the responsible person, no matter what, that can cause us the most trouble. This over-functioning can turn us into enablers, or in some instances, can cause us to cut others off from the opportunity to grow and thrive in their own responsible roles. And so when I say that if you feel guilty, you're probably doing something right, what I mean is that not over-functioning is hard. Many of us are socialized to over-function, and resisting that makes us feel guilty. One of the patterns where this manifests itself often is ACOAs, Adult Children of Alcoholics. Earlier this year, I did a project on the ministerial history of our congregation and was told that one of our former senior ministers announced their struggle with alcoholism from the pulpit early on in their tenure here. So I have been curious about whether this is a pattern affecting behavior in our congregation. Adult children of alcoholics are typically very accustomed to over-functioning in order to hide the effects of their parents' illness. I suspect that many of us are predisposed to over-functioning, whether our parents or ministers suffered from alcoholism, and so I think there's a confluence here of factors amplifying that culture in our congregation. Now, the antidote to all this is both simple and incredibly difficult. Don't overfunction. Let it go, let it go. That perfect girl is gone. Sometimes we know that it's good to take a step back from leadership roles for our own sake and for the sake of letting others flourish. But that can feel so abstract, and the need for a group email to get sent out so imminent. In those moments, know that no matter how guilty it makes you feel to not step up and overfunction, you are doing something healthy for UUCA. If it makes you feel guilty, you're probably doing it right. Sometimes we're giving too much of ourselves to keep something afloat, but we have to face the prospect of a program that we care about disappearing if we do not overfunction. There is literally an existential amount of angst and guilt associated with letting this thing not happen. But if you are giving too much of yourself to that commitment, you need to back off. And if doing so makes you feel guilty, you're probably doing it right. Every little thing is going to be all right. Don, can you join me up here for this last part of the message? I think it ties into what we both want to say to folks.
This is on plan.
My fellow Unitarian Universalist leaders, activists, teachers, caregivers, organizers, speakers, scholars, parents, mentors, musicians, builders of beloved community. I love you, and I need you in this work with me for the long haul. I want 2016-17 to be a successful program year, but I am much more concerned with the status of our faith movement over the course of our lifetimes and the lifetimes of those who will follow us. And so when we make the plea for folks to be good stewards of their time and energy and to not overfunction, it is not because we want to be nice, but rather because there is a lot at stake. Please do not overfunction. Please take care of yourselves and each other. This is too important for us to do otherwise. Peace, salam, shalom, and may it be so.